This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 1054 of Horse Tip Daily. A different horse tip, a different equine topic, a different equestrian expert every day. Horse Tip Daily brings the world of equine knowledge to you, one day at a time. Greetings, horse people. Coach Jen here, and thanks for tuning in to Horse Tip Daily. Today's tip is from Justin at Total Saddle Fit, and he's here to answer a listener question about fitting an unusually shaped horse whose saddle seems to slide back regardless of what she does. And we'll get right to our tip after this message from Uncle Jimmy's. Uncle Jimmy's Hanging Balls and Licky Things help combat stall boredom by providing your horse entertainment in the stall, while at the same time providing them with much-needed minerals and nutrients not found in other treats. Uncle Jimmy's has training treats covered, too, with Uncle Jimmy's Squeezy Buns. Every deliciously soft, squishy treat is individually wrapped for freshness, so your pockets won't get gummed up. Ask for Uncle Jimmy's Hanging Balls, Licky Things, and Squeezy Buns at your local tack and feed supplier, or you can go online to uncle-jimmys.com. And I'm so pleased that Justin from Total Saddle Fit is here again to answer listener questions about saddles and saddle fitting for our horses. How are you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing just fabulous this afternoon. We've been getting emails very regularly from listeners about saddles and saddle fits. So today we're going to help out Claire Asen, who asks this question. Hello, Philip and Reese and Justin. Love the show. We like when they start out with that. I would like to submit a question for the Total Saddle Fit Challenge. I have really enjoyed the segments about saddle fit. However, I don't think the issue I have with my horse has been addressed. My question is, what do you recommend for a horse with an uphill build, high withers, and flat back, which results in the saddle slipping back instead of forward? I've tried many different saddles and have never found one that stays forward where I want it to be, resulting in always feeling a little bit behind the motion or balance point. Oh boy, this is going to be a good one. Thanks very much, Claire.
So, I'd like to start with one little comment coming from a saddle fitting background, is that I find a lot of saddles are oftentimes placed too far forward to begin with, inhibiting the horse's shoulders when the saddle is girthed up. Something just to keep an eye on, because sadly I see it more frequently than not. But
I've heard other saddle fitters say the same thing, Justin.
Oh, okay, good. So I'm not the only one.
No, you are not. I've actually heard saddle manufacturers say that, and it's in disciplines across the board. Everybody puts their saddle too far forward, so that's a good point to bring up.
Definitely. And, I don't think this is Claire's case, but I just wanted to mention that overall that it's something to keep an eye on, make sure their shoulders have some space to move. But as far as fitting these high wither, flat back, uphill horses, there's kind of three things to look at as I see it. And the first and top two in importance is what we call the head of the tree. So that's the front, the pommel of the tree. And these high wither horses, you run into a lot of trouble when you have kind of more old school saddles or saddles that aren't designed for them, in that they have very short tree points, meaning the distance from the top of the pommel to the end of the saddle tree in the front is very short. And that does not allow enough space for the saddle to make contact low enough on the horse's body, and you end up kind of pinching on either side of the withers, and it gives them no space. It can let the saddle rest on top of the withers. It can cause a lot of problems that way. So a lot of newer style saddles have factored this in, but it's still certainly something to keep an eye on, is that if you have a high wither horse, no matter what, you want a saddle with long tree points. That will give you way more flexibility in being able to keep the wither area free, keep the saddle away from the shoulders, keep it from resting on top of the withers. That's the biggest thing. So, and as the horse changes, by the way, being able to adjust it narrower and wider, you'll actually be able to get some adjustability in there without hitting the withers. So long tree points in the front of the saddle is the first thing to keep an eye on.
Now, just quick question from the consumer's point of view. That's a question you need to pose to your trusted saddle fitter, because that's not something you can just turn the flap of the saddle up and look. You were, standing in the tack shop looking at saddles. That's something you need to get the professional advice on.
Yeah, you can definitely, professional advice is a huge help there. There are sort of like rule of thumb ways to check that, which is if you were to compare two saddles, maybe did a little internet research and figured out what saddles are good for high weather horses and which aren't, or which have long tree points and which don't. And if you were able to go into your local tack store and pick up a couple used saddles to try out, it would be pretty obvious which one was more conducive to high withers, because you'd notice how much more space around the whole underside of the pommel there really is around the withers. So above them and to either side. Just kind of that hands-on experimentation or testing will get you part of the way there. And then on top of that, if you have access to a good saddle fitter, then that would be huge as well.
Got it.
So the next thing, too, is in the panels. And in the panels, in the rear part of the saddle panel, there is a little side piece of leather that kind of looks like a triangle when you look at the saddle from the side. It's called the rear gusset. And that area is where the thickness of that, whether it's an inch tall or 3 inches tall, determines how much lift it has in the back of the saddle and how much wool you can put in the panels. So when you have a horse that's uphill and has a flat back, a couple things can happen. One, a saddle can have a tendency to sink down low behind, and that's going to put the rider into a chair seat. It's going to make the saddle unstable. And along with that, it can also make the saddle kind of rock and shift around and scoot on you, scoot back on you if you're not careful. So I would suggest to look for a saddle that has what we call a deep rear gusset, meaning that the height of the panels, when you look at the saddle from the side, is very tall in the rear, because that will give enough space to lift the back of the saddle up with the wool to make it level on the horse and stable. And that's going to be huge, huge, huge in keeping the saddle from moving around. Instability and imbalance are some of the biggest reasons saddles move around, and having that deeper rear gusset will give you the freedom to compensate for that the most possible.
Huh. Fascinating stuff. Well, there you go, Claire. Is there more?
One little quick comment I could add is just something to check on it with billets as well. Anytime your billet line, as you compare it to the ground, is not perpendicular to the ground, that can pull your saddle one direction or the other. So if you find that's the case, there's girth options that can straighten that out, and there's also saddle fitter options that can move billets around to make sure they're perpendicular to the ground, to make sure that's not actually pulling your saddle forward or backward. But that would be the last thing.
So when your saddle is sitting on your horse's back and your horse is standing square on level ground, you should be able to lift the flap up, and those billets should just naturally hang perpendicular to the ground.
Yes, and okay. I will add to that in that when it's girthed up, you like them to be perpendicular to the ground.
They should stay that way.
Because,
okay.
Yes, definitely. Because it's a lot of times what you'll find, and this, to be honest, is more common for saddle sliding forward, but you'll find if the billets angle forward or angle backward when they're girthed up, it's going to naturally pull the saddle in that direction. So it's just kind of something that is working against you for trying to get your saddle to stay in place.
Interesting stuff. Well, thanks again, Justin, and thanks for writing in, Claire.
Well, I'm very happy to do it, and happy for you having me on. Thank you.
And that about takes care of it. You can find links to today's guests, topics, or products at horsetipdaily.com. This podcast has been made possible through the generous support of Uncle Jimmy's and listeners like you. The Horse Radio Network and the Horse Radio Network hosts are not responsible for statements of guests or their opinions. Use your own judgment when listening to the tips provided by the experts on Horse Tip Daily.